Right, we'll make a start. It's now 10 o'clock for session one of the Newcastle Borough Council's committee inquiry into Walleys Quarry. I just take this opportunity to welcome everybody, the members that are on this committee, and they've all got their name labels showing. And of course, welcome to members of the public. It may be helpful, just for the benefit of the live streaming and the record, if we just introduce ourselves. I'm Robert Batley-Smith, Borough Council for the Thistlebury Ward, and I'm chairing this inquiry. And if I can move to my left.
I'm Councillor Dave Jones from Keelwood.
Councillor Janet Wheeldon, representing the Thistlebury Ward.
Councillor Mark Dolly, Westlands.
Councillor Jacqueline Brown, Silverdale Ward.
Councillor Rupert Aycock, Silverdale Ward.
Mandy Pattinson, I'm the Scrutiny Support Officer supporting the.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving us on, the Environment Agency and the UK Health Security Agency cannot attend because the date actually was originally scheduled to take place during the general election, but obviously when that was called, we postponed it, and inevitably we then run into difficulties with holidays and so forth. And this is important that we get the right people from those agencies. And so there then will be a second inquiry day on the 14th of August, when the Environment Agency and the Health Security Agency will attend. I was informed yesterday that Adam Durkee, the MP, cannot attend today due to something in Parliament, but he will be appearing at the separate session on the 14th of August. I mean, clearly it's unfortunate with a clash that he's unable to hear today from the residents that will no doubt be attending for the later sessions. So Walleys Quarry Limited have declined to attend the inquiry, but they did submit evidence that will be considered by members. There will be 3 sessions today, 10 till 12, 2 till 4, and 6 to 9. And during the first session, we'll hear from the local authorities, including Staffordshire County Council, Newcastle Underlyne Borough Council, and the leader and previous MP for Newcastle Underlyne Aaron Bell. The second session, we will hear from local residents and community representatives by the various campaign groups, Silverdale Parish Council, and also the Walleys Quarry Liaison Committee. The third session this evening, we will be hearing from Staffordshire Public Health and 2 local doctors, Dr. Scott and Dr. Salt, who've been involved in assessing the impact of the landfill operations on local residents. Just to give you an idea of where we go from here, following today's proceedings and those on the 14th of August, the committee will prepare a report which will be presented to and be considered by the Council's Cabinet and then in full council. Prior to today, invitees submitted written statements, and these statements will be included in the final written report for information, together with responses to any questions which cannot be answered today. And we will be affording opportunity for those who submitted evidence to submit further comment in response to any unanswered questions or any points they wish to make. There is a parallel study going on at the moment, which is Arcadis. And this study goes wider than what we're doing here today. their study refers to the odours from Walleys Quarry landfill site that's affected residents and businesses within Newcastle under Lyme and the wider area. And a group of public bodies, including Staffordshire County Council, Newcastle under Lyme Borough Council, the Environment Agency and the UK Health Security Agency, have commissioned an independent community impact study, the purpose of which is to gain insights into the health, social and economic consequences caused by Walleys Quarry landfill site. That work is ongoing and is an important aspect of this for people to engage with. But we're concerned here with the odours and the effect on public health. If I can just advise on housekeeping, no fire drills are planned. So if you hear an alarm, please leave the building in a calm manner and proceed to the statue outside in the Queen's Gardens. There's toilets located to the rear of the room, and turn right as you leave the room and proceed down the corridor. Whilst there's not a number of members of the public present, I think it's important, and I'll do this at the start of each session, to refer to conduct. This is to the members of the public. This is an opportunity for elected members to question key participants involved in the Walleys Quarry odour issues over the past few years. And please allow the committee to do the job it has been asked to do, which is to listen to invited organisations and ask questions. This will inform the committee's work, including preparing a report which in due course will be presented to the Council's Cabinet and full Council. And please refrain from voicing any concerns or putting pressure on members. This will not be helpful. Not that I'm expecting any of those present at the moment to do that, but I think it is important to set the ground rules, and I will read that out at the start of each session. So we're going to start in a moment, moving on to the agenda. We have apologies from Councillor Moss, who's giving evidence today at a tribunal, and unfortunately the replacement, Councillor Fox, is also not available. So just looking at the terms of reference for this committee of inquiry, what is the impact of the ongoing odour issues? What needs to be done next and by whom to resolve matters? And what, if any, opportunities have been missed to resolve the issues sooner? I'm going to start this morning with Newcastle under Lyme Borough Council, represented by Nesta Barker and Amanda Morgan. I have to inform members that there's potential legal proceedings pending, and so Nesta. Well, I'm not quite understanding what happened there, some sort of remote interruption by maybe the public, but there we are, or whatever. Anyway, there's legal proceedings pending, and so Nesta and Amanda may have to decline to answer certain questions which relate to such matters. That is entirely a matter for them, and if they do feel that it's not appropriate to answer questions, I would not expect members to press them on that point. So if I can turn now to Newcastle under Lyme Borough Council officers, and if you'd like to make an introduction, and then we'll move on to members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us here today, Chair and members. I'm Nesta Barker. I'm the Service Director for Regulatory Services here at Borough Council. Can you hear me okay without microphone on? Thank you. There's your one. Thank you. And just in terms of background, I've been involved in Walleys Quarry since the start of this incident that happened at the end of 2019. through to serving the abatement notice and dealing with the appeal. And then subsequently, as you've just mentioned, we've looked at a breach of that abatement notice, but I'll go through that in slightly more detail during our presentation. We're prepared to assist in terms of moving through the questions that you've asked. I'll just let Amanda introduce herself.
Amanda Morgan, I'm an environmental health officer and I work with Mr. Walker and regulatory services.
Great, were you able to put the presentation up? Thank you. Thank you. I thought it. Thank you. There you go, much better. I thought it'd be helpful today to go through a presentation to answer the three questions that have been posed to you, and maybe we stop after each one so to give members the opportunity to ask us any additional questions. So, in terms of statutory nuisance, which is the principal legislation that we can deal with, obviously the Borough Council isn't the primary regulator of the site, that is the Environment Agency, because the site holds a permit. However, we do have legislation that's covered under the Environmental Protection Act for statutory nuisance. And there are provisions in that we still have a duty to investigate any other regulated site, including the site of Walleys Quarry. And so we have done that in terms of nuisance and statutory nuisance. So in terms of community impacts, that piece of legislation very much is assessing the level of annoyance and interference with the usual day-to-day operations and living of the lives in the community. And legally, it's defined as, whether or not there's an interference with the reasonable use and enjoyment of your property. Is a legal standard that we go on. So in terms of community impact, we have determined that there is nuisance from odour from the landfill site. I think there's also a high level of annoyance, and I think if you were looking at scales of things, I think nuisance is higher than annoyance. But I think those two things are happening and are regularly reported by the community. We get regularly reported physical symptoms from people. So they are saying that they have headache, nausea, irritation, nosebleeds. It's affecting breathing from the odour. We also have wellbeing impacts reported to us through anxiety and mental health issues. We have the community reporting to us that there's immunity issues, that they're unable to use the parks, the cemetery that's near to site, open spaces, roads, footpaths, schools and play areas. It does go on that people can't use their gardens either. I think the biggest one is that community reporting that the effect on their life activities, how they use their home. They wake up in the morning, they smell the odour. They walk down the stairs, they smell the odour. They go into the garden, they can smell the odour. It's not all day, every day, but it is very persistent, it's very regular, and it is very offensive when it is there. People saying how, events or just the general use of their home, they don't necessarily want people to invite people round to their homes because of the impact on them. They're having to cancel usual activities and just being able to use their home in their normal way, it really affects them. We also get the similar sort of effects in terms of businesses and work, how they're also impacted, the community as a whole. And I think Amanda almost probably go through some of the comments that we receive. Every time we receive a complaint, people have the opportunity to provide us comments, and they're very heartfelt. And so I think it's useful just to go through a few of those, just so that you can get a feel of the sort of things that people are reporting to us.
Thank you, Nesta. I think really to bring us right up to date, I'll read some comments from the weekend. These are individual comments by complainants. It even enters the house yesterday, the visitor had to leave early. Loads of ways over today, had to cancel family barbecue as things. Have to close the windows and cannot sit outside to enjoy the garden and fresh air. I have to keep all my doors and windows shut. Unbearable. Unable to sit in the garden and another day ruined. Unable to have windows open in the evening during the hot spells and unable to use the garden. I couldn't have the windows open on a warm night. It got in through the whole house. Had to vacate the bedroom and sleep in the living room. Can't sleep. Could not have the bedroom window open, but just an example of the complaints is beginning.
This is just a word cloud in terms of the nature and extent of the words people are using to describe things. You know, obviously the smell affecting them at home, the windows open, and you can see there how a lot of those include the physical impacts in terms of how the community feel. So I just thought that was quite a useful way of trying to show some of the things that the community is saying to us. So in terms of Walleys Quarry, it's also had quite a significant organisational impact. It has been a priority for this council since the incident started. We've committed significant staff resources in terms of across the organisation. Certainly from environmental health, which is one of my services, you know, the team has done an excellent job in terms of helping to support. We go out and monitor, we're regularly collecting data. Obviously, we've had the inputs from legal, there's been significant inputs from the communications team, IT, customer services, DEM services, and the executive management team. So this incident has really impacted across quite a wide area of the organisation. And obviously, there's also been Walleys Quarry political engagement by Cabinet and the local elected members. And in terms of financial spend, that has been significant to date. And obviously, we've also committed our limited financial resources to the Walleys Quarry incident. And obviously, over the time, we have had thousands and thousands of complaints. That has created a huge amount of data, and well, that's been one of the significant resource impacts is in terms of data management, developing and maintaining that, so customers can complain at the time that they are impacted. Well, that's my information in relation to that section, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, it's over to members to ask questions. Councillor Adcock.
Thank you. Thanks for that presentation. And you're right to highlight all the sort of costs, including hidden costs, this may have caused the council. And part of that is because it's just gone on for so long. It's been a years and years long operation. Why, in your opinion, do you think that this has dragged on for so long when there are many other landfill sites across the country, you know, that regulators deal with and councils deal with? Why do you think this particular issue was dragged on for so long and caused the council so much time and expense and people so much nuisance?
I think in relation to ours, and I'll most probably come on to this a little bit, in terms of our regulatory input in relation to statutory nuisance, obviously we completed an investigation, certain abatement notice, and then we had to go through an appeal process, and that is dictated through court, and those unfortunately do take time. And one of my later slides most probably goes through those timelines in relation to those. So certainly in terms of our activities, you know, we have been you know, only been able to proceed at the rate that we've been able to get the permissions today. So, like I said, I've got quite a good slide later on to change all those timelines.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary on that?
No, I look forward to seeing the slide later. Thanks.
Councillor Whelan.
Thank you, Nesta. Good presentation. One of the things that you say is we take as a local authority every possible step, procedural step, properly in an organised fashion to try and deal with this. One of the things that I've had from residents is, what are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? And that I can understand it because I live on the fringe of this, so I'm impacted from every list of things that you put up there personally. My house is sort of probably not as close as those who live on top of it, but definitely impacted. The problem is not everyone realises that it isn't our fault and we've done absolutely everything. Is there any way that that message can be delivered more coherently to people? Because they don't always understand the legalities, the procedural steps that have to be taken. Is there anything more that we could have done to make that more cogent understanding for the residents?
Well, hopefully, through this presentation and this inquiry, you'll be able to see the efforts that we have taken and what we are regularly doing. So, Amanda, myself and the team are regularly going out. We do track complaints. We do also look at when there is likely to be high over episodes. And we will go out. So we will go out and we will monitor in the area. So we have handheld drone instruments that we will go. We're also doing odor assessments ourselves. So we're undertaking those visits. We also have the ability that if people make complaints that say that it's happening at that time, we will go and knock on those people's doors and try and actually visit them within their homes. So proactively, we're trying to deal with those. Obviously, we are a very small team and those are targeted visits, but we still are undertaking those. And that also helps in terms of, I suppose, moving forward to be able to assess it, gather evidence, and then determine whether or not there have been any breaches. But I can go through those timelines a bit like Councillor Hancock in terms of later on, in terms of the size and answers and those that's a bit more.
You have supplementary? Thank you.
Obviously, these visits, the additional cost is, I don't know whether it's fathomable or whether we can actually, want to go through that exercise, which is again another cost to actually do it. But it's costing this borough council, apart from the impact on local people, it's actually costing this borough council money to allow them to continue. But we're not allowing them to continue. We're doing everything we can to stop them. So where does this additional cost to us as councillors and a local authority? Where do we turn for someone has to pay? It seems that we are paying for something we don't want to happen. And our hands are tied. Is there anything that we can do to offset those costs?
Unfortunately, in terms of offsetting them, most probably not. We have a legal statutory duty to investigate complaints. So, that is something we do. We are targeting those so that we're only trying to visit at the times where we consider there would be the worst case scenarios. We are looking to, gather the evidence so that we could potentially take any further steps. But in terms of the cost for the council in undertaking those activities, they are something that we, unfortunately do end up covering in terms of that. If there were any further proceedings, then costs come into that. But, it is our duty and we're required in the legislation to actually undertake investigations and determine, in terms of nuisance. So it's possible, unfortunately, undertake. But in terms of the incident, the nature and extent and time and resource is far more significant than we have had previously. And that's why, on a number of occasions, we have been back in terms of budget allocation for this. And those have been agreed through council in order for us to take the action that we have taken.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I think what strikes me, you mentioned very early on in the presentation, yes, that we are the authority the body that has taken legal action on this and defines some kind of positive outcome for residents, yet we are not a listed regulator of the site. Has any exploration of the legal decision we have obtained over it being a statutory nuisance been able to provide grounds to legally induce the regulators to actually do their job properly? Because one would imagine by establishing that it is a statutory nuisance, that would breach the threshold for those regulatory bodies who also have been taking action. And then leading on from that, further to Councillor Wheeldon's point, would that not then provide a legal basis to go to the regulators and start extracting costs for them? We are essentially doing their job for them, funding ourselves to do that. Not only have we demonstrated that they have not regulated the site properly, that we have had to obtain a statutory nuisance, but we've had to do that at our own costs, where they should have been doing that job. So I wonder if any exploration of that has taken place.
Certainly, as officers, we work with our partners and the other regulators. So most of the people who you will be speaking to in terms of this inquiry, we do meet with and we share information. In terms of how, obviously in terms of the primary regulator, that being the Environment Agency, yes, I think there's a couple of, very critical points that have been made in terms of the legal action. Walleys Quarry have accepted that they have created a statutory agency, and that is something that shouldn't be dismissed very lightly, especially, throughout this incident. So that has been admitted. We do have that valid abatement notice in place. In terms of the EA being able to progress that, I think that's most probably something that they would be able to answer how they would use our information. We do share information with them where we can. We're happy to offer and support that. We equally will share information and intelligence that we do have in terms of our visits, what measurements we do have, but we are not authorised officers for the Environment Agency, and therefore, in terms of their legislation, we can provide information, but we are not authorised to make those decisions.
Thank you. Do you have a supplement?
I do, thank you, Chair. With regard to the other measurements, we had that period of time where the EA recording at one of the sites wasn't calibrated appropriately, and therefore there was a mismatch between the data they were obtaining for levels of H2S and the actual levels that were out there. I'm assuming that we were using drone measuring during that time period. Were there any abnormalities that we picked up with our own recording, and were the EA made aware?
So in terms of the quality monitoring stations and drones, they use two different types of instruments. The drones are handheld instruments. What we do know through this investigation is that levels are very transient, they're very variable. So it's very difficult to get, very consistent measures. Certainly we're not taking measures at, say, inlet point as the MMX. We can equally get very variable rates, even when you cross one side of the street to the other. I think in terms of all our drone measurements, we do produce those in terms of our key performance indicators to the cabinet. We produced the previous reports. But because of the difference of instruments, that direct correlation is not something that we want to take in terms of a date time. We do obviously look to see what that general trend is, but they are different instruments, so we wouldn't compare them the same way.
Yes.
So you want to supplement?
Yes, please, Chair.
Well, I'll let you on this occasion.
Thank you. Really good. Just to check, was our data made available to?
Our data is available online through our cabinet reports, and the EA has specifically requested that.
Thank you. Nobody else has asked for the floor. But I would like to make 1.5 observations, I suppose. Already has been mentioned the Flawed Environment Agency data, which I think we can state understates the level of pollution, if you like, gas escapes, and does in no way overstate it. And I think that's important, but perhaps you could confirm that. And then the second point, and I know this is one that Councillor Wheeldon's mentioned previously, is concerns about complaints fatigue. So I think it's fair to say that the complaints probably underestimate the number of people affected or whatever, because some people affected won't complain. So if we take the number of complaints, we can say it's not unreasonable to assume that it's actually worse than that. But perhaps you could just briefly comment on those 2 points. Thank you.
In relation to the MMF hydrogen sulfide level data, I don't have any further information than what the Environment Agency has put out on its website. So I'm afraid I don't have any further information, but I've heard the same in terms of the webcast that they have done, as you just outlined there, Councillor. In relation to complaint fatigue, there's a lot of triggers where people will complain, and people will complain at different levels. So yes, people will get fatigue, and it is quite a lengthy process to complain. I will say that, there's a lot of information that does need to be provided, but people have done that. There could be some under reporting. There could also be some periods of time where there is some over reporting. What we have done is each month, in terms of our cabinet updates, we do a graph which measures the weekly H2S exceedance level and the WHO annoyance level, and tracks the complaints from both the Borough Council and the Environment Agency week by week. And what you do tend to find is those weeks where you have higher levels measured at the MMS, you also get higher level of complaints. So the trend is still there. There's always argument in terms of motivation, in terms of complaint over or under reporting in relation to those. But what I can say, and what I've said in terms of the evidence, is those trends happen. Genuinely, people complain when they are aggrieved. When we go out, they complain, and we usually witness that. And, the MMF data does show that when there's higher levels, we get higher levels of complaints. So they do all tie it.
Okay, thank you for that, but I think it's a valid working assumption that the situation is actually worse in terms of the recorded data and in terms of the level of complaints than the underlying data suggests. So can you continue with your presentation now, please, unless you want to make a point before?
If I could do, sorry, I've just thought about one other element. Obviously, people can complain to the Environment Agency and the Borough Council. And, that graph where I've said, you will always see that the complaint levels to the Environment Agency are higher. Now, obviously, in terms of that, you could look at adding them together, or people are duplicating those, and that isn't something that we can say. But as a primary regulator, they always do get more complaints than we do at the Borough Council. But what I will say in terms of the Borough Council, this has been very consistently, month on month, the most complained about site to Borough Council since the incident started. I'll carry on then, just in terms of the second question, which is what needs to be done next and by whom to resolve the matter. I think, we need to take into account that actually the responsibility for the site management, how they operate it, and the control of any impacts actually sits with Walleys Quarry. They are the operators of the site, they are the owners of the site, they are the legal entity of the site. They are the people that have got the abatement notice served upon them, which prohibits any reoccurrence of the owned nuisance. So the responsibility for the owner does sit very firmly with Walleys Quarry. Obviously, there's a multi-agency regulatory framework in place relating to the site. I think, as we said, the EEA regulates the operation against the environmental permit. in relation to certain pollution risks. Newcastle Borough Council deals with statutory nuisance that I've gone into. We also deal with air quality, which is an assessment of air quality of certain pollutants across the whole of the borough. It doesn't include hydrogen sulfide, but it does cover other pollutants. We also deal with contaminated land, and we have a regime for dealing with contaminated land. Because the site has an active permit, that is specifically exempt from the contaminated land regime at this moment in time. Staffordshire County Council, they are the Waste and Minerals Planning Authority for the site. They also deal with public health and highways. As you said, the UK HSA, although they don't have a regulatory framework, provide the health advice for the other agencies. Police obviously deal with detection and prevention of crime, and fire deal with early response involving fire. So there's quite a range of partners and organisations involved in terms of the response in relation to the site. But maybe in terms of, if I focus in terms of our action, this is the abatement notice that I served on Walleys Quarry, and it's most probably worthwhile going through some of the actions that we put in place in relation to that. So this notice, which has now been validated, is satisfied of the existence and unlikely occurrence of an odour nuisance. It provides a nuisance designation zone, which you can see in terms of the map. And that's where no nuisance can occur. The reason for setting such a zone is so that it gives an area to focus our investigations. And you may well say that actually the complaints go further and wider than that zone. But if there was no nuisance within that zone, the chances are there's no nuisance in terms of the wider community as well. The notice requires Walleys Quarry Limited to abate that nuisance, and also prohibits them from causing, permitting, or otherwise allowing the recurrence of the nuisance. In terms of my next slide, this is where I'll go through the legislation and the timescales really. So in terms of our legislation, that's along the left-hand side arrow. So the Environmental Protection Act requires us to have a duty to investigate complaints of statutory nuisance. And in terms of our process flow, we undertook that between December 2019 and July 2020. The Act gives us a duty where we establish that there is a nuisance to serve an abatement notice. That is under Section 80 of the Environmental Protection Act, and that was done on the 13th of August 2020. Obviously, any company has the right of appeal against the abatement notice. That was appealed on 5 grounds, and was actually submitted on the 2nd of September 2021. That appeal process took till October 2022 to come to fruition, and that was through a mediated settlement, although the abatement notice was agreed in court. We obviously then go back in terms of that abatement notice, that they have 5 months then to comply with that abatement notice because it was the original form, which took us to the 6th of March 2023 before we could consider any enforcement action on breach of that abatement notice. In relation to the Environmental Protection Act, obviously we have said in April 2024 through our Cabinet report that we did consider that there's been a breach of that abatement notice. However, as part of the process, because we are not the primary regulator, we do have to request permission from the Secretary of State to take any enforcement action against the affected site. We're still awaiting that response. That was completed in 29th of April 2024. Happy to take any questions on that section.
Okay, members, anybody can start one.
Thank you. Why don't you just clarify something for me? So in terms of the abatement notice, because I've heard a couple of different things, including from some statements I believe the operator has put out. Because they'll say, oh, all landfills can be expected to produce a smell. Does any odour outside of the boundary of the site constitute a statutory nuisance?
No, it's not purely the detection of odour. it's something that it's an over at a level where it affects the material use and enjoyment of your property, as I said in the beginning. So we look at a number of factors to establish whether or not there is a nuisance, and that's called the FIDAL factor. You may well have heard us talk about that. So we have to look at the frequency, the intensity, the duration, the offensiveness, and the location of that. An assessment of those parameters would help us determine whether or not there is a statutory nuisance.
But so in terms of, because these zones are definitely, they're meeting those terms to a degree. But to say it's living close to a landfill site is no excuse. And say that even if you're living close to the site, which shouldn't be close to residential homes anyway, that would still constitute statutory nuisance. Can you just clarify why it obviously took from March 23 to April 24 to beginning of taking those proceedings? Is that because you had to see certain trends in the data, or you had to do some more analysis, or was it because of the winter that we had recently in the terms of uptick in complaints? Why was that moment chosen to enforce the abatement?
So in relation to the intervening period, we've obviously, through our mediated settlements, we have been having meetings with Walleys. We have discussed, the complaints that have been undertaken. We've been looking at deep dives in terms of any of those peaks of events, and we've tried to report those. I think you've alluded to this over this winter at the beginning of this year. There has been a significant peak in terms of those complaints. And it's those where we have determined that, all those elements have aligned in order for us to be able to make a call in terms of a breach of the abatement notice.
Councillor Whitman.
Seems to me that us as the local authority are the ones that at our cost are gathering data and information after the event each time. If I look at the old principles of project management, what everyone used to call the RACI matrix, which is responsibility, accountability, who needs to be consulted and who needs to be informed. We seem to have a responsibility to our residents, I understand that, but the responsibility actually seems to lie with the Environment Agency and Walleys Quarry Limited. The accountability is essentially Walleys Quarry and the Environment Agency. The people who are consulted are the local people, residents, and the local authority, their representatives, and also the same group of people are being informed. And we inform Walleys Quarry and the Environment Agency, also all available to them. So we seem to be on the back foot all the time. Is there anything that we could do or have done at our cost yet again to have forced this through any sooner, quicker, more effectively?
Certainly in terms of our action, as I've said, we have been dictated by a court process, and some of those things are not at the gift of the local authority to be able to influence. Certainly in terms of our appeal, we were looking at trying to find a 4-week time period within the court with a district judge. And those sort of parameters create significant delays. They are outside of our control, some of those court processes. In terms of our other organisations, obviously they do have processes that they need to go through, and it will be very difficult for me to say in terms of where they are at in terms of those. I think that's most probably best question made to them. What I can say is that we are trying to help and support with the information we have got, and we regularly share with them, and we will continue to do that to try and assist to resolve the problem, because I think that's the biggest thing. Everybody wants to see a resolution of this for the community, which is at heart of who's suffering.
Thank you. It does strike me, listening to the timescale, that there's actually a major fault or issue with the legislation that underpins this, in so much as there's an issue, there's a nuisance, you serve a notice, it's then appealed, there's then a delay, and so forth. and then the nuisance continues during that particular period. So it does strike me that the underlying legislation or whatever, I'm not defining it, is effective in a material way. Could you just comment on that?
In terms of an abatement notice, the tools are quite strong. There are a number of different options, but case law has set precedents in terms of a number of things. So, you know, in terms of an abatement notice, there is the ability to better the discretion of, you know, of being able to appear and still being required to undertake works. So you can do some of those things, but previous case law would say that it's reasonable, or most probably the notice wouldn't stand in terms of that appeal. Obviously, where we needed to be in terms of serving the abatement notice is having a notice which was valid, was defendable, and would stand up to the scrutiny of the court to be able to be endorsed and be there for the future. So, you know, that has happened. Now, we did specify a time period to undertake works because at the time when we served the abatement notice, there was capping works that was needed. There was more gas infrastructure that was needed in terms of the site. Some of those things do take time to undertake. And we did utilise experts to give us some advice in terms of what would be reasonable timescales for those works to be done and to be achieved. So our primary aim in terms of serving the abatement notice was to have something that would stand up to challenge the scrutiny and the previous case law that was held. And hopefully, you know, we have done that because it was actually endorsed and we do have that abatement notice.
Okay, thank you for that. But just to finally clarify, you don't think there's anything we should or could be doing in terms of questioning the regulatory framework and asking for changes to that to speed up the process?
I think in terms of that, obviously, because this is a committee site and we're not the primary regulator, I think it's been able to provide with those primary regulatory enforcement powers. You know, it is very, very unique that a borough council has taken nuisance action against a regulatory site. You know, we shouldn't, you know, that isn't something that the regime's put in place to consider. You know, a permit is in place to prevent the pollution coming from that site. You know, so we wouldn't routinely get involved in those sites as a borough council. You know, we have processes that we regulate under the same legislation ourselves, different sector of industry, but you wouldn't expect somebody else to have to step into that. So it is quite unique to use the statutory nuisance powers. And, you know, and they are quite wide ranging, they are quite powerful, but it is quite unique that we have done those. In terms of other options or other powers that are available, yes, it would be lovely to be able to do everything a lot quicker. You know, that appeal was very, very time consuming. In terms of getting to an outcome, that's something, you know, in terms of the court system and being able to progress those and deal with legal cases, you know, as the information comes through. So they do unfortunately take time.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No, do you wish to continue with the third part?
I do have one last slide in terms of the third part, but I think I've most probably covered most bits, which is that legal process does take time. Obviously, the appeal took from September 21 to October 22, and then obviously we had the period of time compliance after. So the whole process from end to end took from December 2019 to March 2023 to get that valid abatement notice. That is quite significant. I do appreciate that is a long period of time that the community has suffered. And all that I can say is legal processes are ongoing in terms of moving forward. It's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I found that was really informative and useful, and members have asked a number of questions. Before we release you, do any members have any final questions? Councillor Brent.
Thank you, Nesta, for outlining everything that's happened. I want to take us back a bit before this period, really, because having read through all the information and spoken to stakeholders, one of the significant factors seems to be when there was an agreement for the tonnage to be increased into the landfill site. And if my information is correct, some of the local bodies, including Silverdale Parish Council, objected to this. But it was granted, if my information is correct, October 2020. I would like to ask the Environment Agency about that in the period of consultation and the decisions leading up to that decision. Would you be able to comment on that in terms of triggering increased complaints, or sort of where you came in after that date in terms of it changing the situation, please?
So that application came in as a variation to the permit to the Environment Agency, and ourselves as the Borough Council are a consultee to that, and likewise we also objected to that increase of tonnage. So that is something that we did do. Obviously, shortly after that, you know, the complaints had started to occur in terms of a direct correlation between the two. Obviously, there's a lot of things in terms of the landfill site. You know, there is the waste material coming in, there's the gas infrastructure, there's the engineering, and there's also the capping and phasing in terms of the site. So in terms of direct correlation of those, which, you know, in terms of the point, that's something, you know, to be determined, I think, in relation to those. But certainly from the Borough Council, we did equally object to that increase in tonnage.
Thank you. Do you have something? Yes, please.
Thank you, Nesta. So just to be clear, in terms of any opportunities missed and, you know, answering that question, the council did object at that time along with other stakeholders, and the decision was made to go ahead anyway.
And in terms of variation application, the Environment Agency sent that out. They also reviewed the application, any consultees comments, and then they made the decision on that. So the decision was made by the Environment Agency for that.
Thank you. Everybody seems content. So just formally to record my thanks as chairman and the thanks of the committee for your time today and for answering our questions, which I think was searching in a comprehensive way. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Next up will be the county council representatives. So there's a need for changing names and changing personnel. And then I've got a document here that we need to sign to say that you actually came. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. If you'd just like to both introduce yourselves, then go into the presentation and then we'll take questions from the members. If you feel you want to stop and take questions at a particular point, that's a matter for your judgment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and the morning committee, and thank you very much for inviting on today. Sadly, Chair, we obviously serve the same residents in this area as you do, so it's good fun to get the opportunity to come along as we do to parish councils and all the other bits of civic proudly that make up the area. So thank you very much. So I'm Mark Parkinson. I'm the head of planning policy and enabling. And on my left here is Neil Goodwin, who you'll be very familiar with from the liaison committees. So if you want to add anything, Neil.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Gooding. I'm the Principal Planning and Regulation Officer. Council to monitor the planning commission about the site. Been doing that for a number of years now. Since many of you know, I've seen that liaison meetings and meetings on the site for a number of years.
Thank you, Neil. And I'm just conscious, obviously, that whilst you're very familiar with the officers like Nesta, who've worked for many years, many of you may not have met them before. So, by the way, just a quick introduction. In terms of the advice as an officer, what I give to elected members, I always sort of take the view that I'll give advice to sort of anyone who will listen to me in as much as if I go to parish council, district borough council, council, you'll hear the same advice because at the end of the day, I'm a professional officer guided by my professional institutes and all that comes with that. So in terms of my first degree, I was a geochemist. So that's kind of the chemistry of geology. So spent a lot of time in my first part of the career working on atomic land and landfills. Moved into the waste collection authority role, so kind of well versed in understanding how collections of waste, bin collections, and all the rest of it work. Took a job at the county council of the waste disposal authority, so I understand how, from a technical point of view, the operations and providing the operational aspects of disposal structure works. And then, so more last years, but last 10 years, I've been working in this waste planning authority stroke economic development type role. So I just thought it'd be quite useful just to sort of understand that, and if anyone's interested, all my stuff's on LinkedIn. Whilst I don't present myself to be an expert witness of such, in terms of landfills, it just provides a sort of understanding of broad context and been dealing with waste and local authorities for many. So I'll try and answer all the questions as best as I can, but given that kind of broad kind of remit background, if there's anything we can't answer today, we'll obviously follow the writing. But given I've brought Neil along today, out with everyone from our team, given he's been on the liaison committee, and hopefully we'll know any detail that can deal with today. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we'll move on to questions now.
Well, yes, please. So we're not proposing to present any slides. So we're in your hands for the next however many minutes you want to use as well.
That's fine. So we'll now take anonymous questions, please. Councillor Adcock jumps in first, as usual.
I'll have to get mine out of the way. Thank you. Look at your submission here. The obvious thing that jumps out is obviously about the restoration, and we know that even if the site were to complete its life cycle and be restored, then may still well be owner issues. Given the sort of track record of this site, the community have very little faith in the capability of the operator or the regulator to restore the site as has been set out in the planning permission. So my question is, are you having communication with the Environment Agency to have contingencies in case this company is unable to fulfil, for some reason, its restoration of the site as set out in the planning permission?
So I suppose how to break into that. It was interesting in terms of the question you asked me before about the change in the license in terms of the additional tonnages that the license gave the operator. Now, in some ways, you can describe it as sort of turning a tap on and off a little bit. You've got the void space in the landfill, and how quickly you fill it depends on obviously the plans then to restore it and all the rest of it. So the base that we set out are our pretty good kind of estimate in terms of where we think they're going to be based on the transport movements and the restrictions and the ability to fill that void. So in a way, it's in the community and the slide you showed earlier about the impacts. I can only imagine what it must be like for the residents there, and put myself in their circumstances, thinking, what will we be doing if I were going to live through this? Family having to do this, and it's like horror. And for me, the fact that going to make a decision about how quickly you fill that void space. Means obviously for all residents, it will be obviously complete all the emissions under control as soon as possible. So that's a good thing. But obviously, on the other hand, we want to make sure that Newcastle residents and the Walleys residents got places to dispose of their waste. So it's always a balance between preserving that void space and get this site sorted as quick as possible, which really comes down to the role of the regulator. Is the Environment Agency's job is to make sure that permit is operated as it should be, and hold the operator accountable if it's not, and have good remedial strategies to make sure it's brought under control as soon as possible. So really, the frustration really is that needs to happen yesterday. It's been going on far too long. And the sort of broad point is you've heard the multi-agency responses. We're all working together to try and bring this to a resolution as quickly as we can. If there's anything more particular, I don't mind sort of adding any detail, but in short, that's the mission of all of us around that multi-agency table, is to sort this mess out as soon as possible.
It's not for me to. It's not for me to take away Councillor Hancock's supplementary, but I think there are serious concerns as to what happens when the site is full.
That's exactly it, Chair. The point I'm going to make is it says in your submission that, because I totally agree that the Environment Agency needs to step up into its role, and we as other agencies that are left picking up pieces often, which is our big concern that's going to happen here. It says there will be no risk to the community as long as the operator complies with the terms of the environmental permit, but it's shown in it as a track record that it's unable to do so on multiple occasions. So just specifically, what will be your role as county council should the operator go bankrupt or leave the site or not be able to restore it as they've set out? What will be the role of the county council in that to plan for restoration?
Okay, so again, just back to first principles in terms of our role as the planning authorities, obviously to ensure that the principles of this design in the right places for the purposes it was intended. And you all know that sort of long and convoluted history that's published on the website that I don't intend to go through today. But in essence, the land use is now established, and there's not much we can do about that other than basically see it through to the end now in terms of getting it restored to a high standard. And that's where, again, we're reliant on the Environment Agency to do their job. And as part of that process, in terms of how they're doing that and any contingency plans that they'll be working on, we'll be very dynamic in terms of listening to stakeholders. So if they said, well, we could sort this mess out tomorrow if we do X, Y, Z, and can use planning as a tool to do that, we'd act as a responsible authority and say, yeah, bring it on, we'll get it for our planning committee as soon as possible. So other than that is that, we continue to sit on the table with that military task force, but ultimately it's the Environment Agency working with, they are a non-departmental body, as you all know, they're sponsoring DEFRA, so that contribute DEFRA back into the Treasury and the wider number 10 policy unit. We'll be there along with Newcastle Borough Council to keep our kind of what's on their throat, as it were, to make sure they're doing their job. Get it sorted.
When you finish speaking, could you make sure you turn your microphone off? Because it's continually flashing and there may be something wrong with it. Okay, fine. Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Jay. Obviously, part of your requirement will be monitoring the restoration of the site, as given in that answer to Councillor Hancock. One of the concerns that I have about that site is that at present we have a significant odour emanating from the site. That odour persists even through temporary capping of significant portions of the site. My concern is when final restoration occurs that we're going to continue to see those odours emanating from the site. What work has the planning authority done or been convinced of work by other agencies with regard to locating the source of this odour? Something's clearly causing the odour. And if we're about to bury it and cap it and put chimneys in that are just going to funnel concentrated overruns, whose responsibility is it to ensure that that site afterwards is safe for the residents in the area?
It's sort of two things there really, in terms of the sort of final detail about the restoration. I believe Walleys Quarry issued a press notice earlier this week or end of last week to say that they're going to start working with the community to come up with those plans. So you think through the liaison committee, they'll present some of their ideas to them around them to give them sort of first sight of that stuff. And then they'll start testing their ideas with the officers of the county council. And then there'll be a very formal process after all that kind of pre-app discussion, working with community groups to launch a formal planning application to sort out the fine detail of that aftercare. So you'll all get a chance to influence that, and as a borough council, you'll be a constant team to make sure that you properly fed into that process. But of course, as our role at the county council is in go through that and determine that application, we will of course be saying to the Environment Agency, you need to convince us and the public that this final restoration capital plan is going to work. We don't want 10, 15 years of restoration without any strong kind of be able to sleep at night that they're actually on the right track and doing their job here. So that's kind of how it's going to play out over the next 12, 18, 24 months. I expect, and hopefully you'll all be engaged in that process.
Supplementary.
Thank you, Chair. Will that involve management of gases from the site?
I suspect that'll be more of a permitting issue, but again, you would expect us to that kind of aftercare package to sort of make sure that we've got this kind of holistic, the office together, and the agency, this all does work, doesn't it, in terms of your licensing and strengthening of the license. So I think we'll do our best to join the dots and make sure that the whole thing is holistically kind of sort of around rather than just worry about the final and levels and all the rest of it. So that'll come through the process, and obviously listen to that today. We'll sort of be more aware of it and make sure we take care of that where we can. Neil, just come in, please.
And then Councillor Week.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add a little bit to that. Also, just point out that although as Mark has mentioned, there's potential to amend the restoration scheme. There is a currently approved restoration plan in place as well, which does allow for the gas management system remaining on site. And also, if they do look to change the restoration scheme, that will also need to allow for the rest of the management plan to remain on site as well. So that's also the restoration scheme that we've approved. It looks at the land form and the planting and how the site would look after the site has been restored, with detail of things like the nature of the material that will form the permanent capping and stuff like that. Again, it's something that is covered by the Environment Agency. So that's the detail isn't really in the restoration scheme. The Environment Agency will be able to give details on it.
I have questions using out of my ears and mouth, and I'll translate to, I might do subsections. My concern is that local residents, and myself to some extent, look at, and even though I've got experience in the law, I look at, and they look at what's happening, where's the paperwork, why have you done this, why is it taking so long? Not from just the borough council, but from also the county council, who we refer to you as the sort of overarching, but for the whole county. It's not just the pre, but there's the pre, during and post issues. Pre Walleys Quarry being granted, we can do nothing about. We as a borough and you as a county sort of inherited that, the people that represent the residents now. The two problems that we're trying to solve are the during operation and the post operation. we don't seem, although we are recognised to have the accountability by local residents, we don't seem to have control over solving the problems that occur. And even when we do exert control through various orders and legal action we take, it takes a long time and then is actually overridden by some authoritative body, the Environment Agency or the courts. What do you think you as county and us borough can do to actually overcome this, so that as well as we having the problem in that we represent the residents and trying to solve it, what could you do to make sure that we're not overridden by these other authority bodies who seem to not have an interest in solving the problem in an expeditious manner?
So I mentioned earlier about our sort of my sort of career kind of background, and so just pulling out some of my sort of waste disposal authority kind of knowledge. You know, back in the day, well, county councils were charged with a much greater role over waste disposal. So I think it was during the 80s that I believe the government legislation changed where it had to sort of split out some of our waste disposal operations from the main body of the council to set up what they called a local authority waste disposal company, or LAWDAC as the acronym. And then a lot of councils were then sort of hired up the LAWDACs to private companies. And in Stature's case, Biffa took all that sort of what I call the municipal landfill, so different from the commercial waste that we deal with here. But the point is that, you know, the county council has had its kind of role drastically sort of pared down in terms of ability to sort of get involved in operational of landfills. And so really it all comes down to the role of the Environment Agency. And I haven't got much to at the moment in the way they've dealt with this side, but the Environment Agency have been quite clear to me that their job is not to kind of take control and salvage and use this landfill to operate themselves or under a contract. They're saying they're charged by government to just make the environment safe. So if the facility kind of fell apart, the Environment Agency just have to step in and make a mistake. They don't have to think too much about how it's going to stand the test of time over 20, 30 years. And that all comes back to the role between the Environment Agency, I believe, and working with DEFRA and ultimately the Umweltbehörde and the Treasury. So for me, given the legislation and the planning over this period of time is 30 years, you know, I think the authority need to sort of look themselves in there and say, is legislation still fit the purpose in terms of bodies like the local authorities, in terms of our ability to step in and intervene? And obviously Newcastle will be doing a great job at doing what they've done with powers they've got. But clearly the local authorities have both been in the agency's hands to take the lead on this. And you know, ultimately those questions that you're asking now are for them to answer, because you know, we're very clear we've exhausted all our sort of financial and legislative levers we can pull. So that's kind of where we're at with it. I'm happy to keep on answering any more bits if you've got any more specific kind of bits you want to pull on.
Thank you. Councillor Dillon, can I just ask that you try and focus on the question?
That was one of the.
Yeah, no, I mean, just sort of if you could be a little more focused, because otherwise we'll, you know, time's going press. I don't want to constrain you.
You won't do that. It occurs to me that there's a lot of people who see the problem at county, at borough council, at the local residents. I'm not sure of Red Industries, we're calling it Walleys Quarry, but I do know that they changed from Walleys Quarry to Red Industries. And I'm well aware that that can be a way of trying to absolve themselves of responsibility, and that they change and therefore dump responsibility of and an activity that is causing a problem. I'm not sure how much more we can do as a borough council, which is why I was asking you, is there anything, you're putting it at now at the foot of the Environment Agency and saying that there's nothing that county council can do to support activity in an expeditious manner to solve this problem, is that right?
So,
Is that succinct?
yes.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you. So, again, I think this comes back to, you know, as part of this inquiry, obviously Walleys Quarry, the clients sort of turn up, which is a shame, because at some point it'd be really critical to understand the relationship between Walleys Quarry, Red Industries and the Environment Agency in terms of why they've both got to where they are now, because in terms of the bit that's within our jurisdiction, in terms of county council planning, let's take highways as the example. When we had all the problems and at the beginning, when we really sort of tied up on some of the planning conditions that were applied, it ended up with all the unintended consequences of HGVs being parked outside the facility or these queuing to sort of get in very slowly. And so we, you know, even though it's been very strange given the circumstances, we've still maintained as professional officers that kind of role with Walleys Quarry to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we found for the liaison community mechanism, the example, once that was re-established and we're starting to sort of really pull in the same direction, he sorted out some of his issues. So HGVs, when we said to the current operator, look, you've really got to sort this, you've got to regularize it. They sort of accepted it after going around the sort of week, as it were, on bedrooms and all that, which I'm not going to get into. But once they saw the you know, common sense, they put planning applications to the county council. It was determined very quickly, and you know we've done removed great strides and making HGV moves a lot better. It's still not perfect, but at least the operator he stepped in to work with the liaison committee to try and make it better, and he listened to ideas from the community to try and do the things within their control to improve matters. So, you know, so that is the sort of active role we're taking at county council. We're at the table, and we'll talk to the operator, you know, we'll talk to the environment agency, and we're using our influence to try and bring this to a resolution. But as I said earlier, which I think is going to be a common theme, is the environment agency are going to step up, work with central government departments behind them to kind of have a play plan of action.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, you probably heard me ask Nesta if they agreed to the increase in tonnage and the change of types of waste in October 2020. Could I ask, was Staffordshire County Council consulted on that? And if so, what was your recommendation?
I suspect there were, and I've kind of got it in my mind that because the overall traffic movements didn't change, or HGV movements in particular, then, you know, as far as our statutory kind of responsibilities in terms of our advice, you know, we would probably say, you know, we can't object to that as such. But I don't know if Neil, did we give any more sort of more nuanced response than that, you know? If you don't, it doesn't matter.
I can't bring it to hand, so we can find it advice. So they're going to say exactly what we said at the time. My recollection is that our questions and concerns about that potential change were that obviously the planning conditions restricted like the number of vehicles coming into the site, as Mark said. And the question was, okay, if you want to increase the tonnage, will that affect the number of vehicles coming in? And the answers we had from engineers and Walleys Quarry were that no, it wasn't going to change the number of vehicles potentially because they're bringing in really larger vehicles than previously in that. So they've got more to make within the number of vehicles. Because it didn't affect any of the planning conditions on the site, we objected to it. That's that clarification. I think we didn't either support it or outright reject it. The planning conditions, and also beyond that is the matter for the environment agency.
Yeah, I think Councillor Brown had a very important point there. And it may be helpful if afterwards you could confirm the position in an email to the Secretariat so that we've got total clarity on the situation. Councillor Brown, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Chair. We heard Mark say about filling the in terms of speed by agreeing to increase tonnage, that would make the operation occur quicker. Would that have been a factor in you agreeing, or would it be based only on the vehicles, etc., as Neil's just outlined?
Purely an existing condition which sets out the vehicle movements, it would have no influence on the rates in which the landfill was going to increase.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Well, thank you very much indeed for your attendance this morning, which has been appreciated. And there was the one point that I think does merit a confirmation of position in writing. And we have heard a lot about legislation and the legislative framework and so forth. And that's something we'll have to return to on the 14th of August with the new MP who wasn't able to be here today. But I'm sure if I can ask the Secretariat to make sure that Adam Jurgi has got the link to the meeting so that he's aware of what's taken place today. And it's nice to see confirmation of that point from one of the Labour members, which I do appreciate, because I'm not making a political point here. And so if we could ask the Secretariat to make sure that he has the link so that he can see the proceedings and prepare for the 14th of August. So thank you very much indeed. And that concludes this session. We'll now move on to the Leader of the Council. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much, Councillor Tax, for coming to make your points today. It's entirely a matter for you how you approach it. But I'm sure, having heard what the other speakers have said, you've probably got some important points that you wish to put across to the committee, and then we'll take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will make some introductory comments, and I will then obviously spend most of the time obviously answering questions. But I think just like when Nesta introduced the statement that she made the case of the effect that this is having on residents' lives, those that are nearest to it, and also in the wider town. I'd just like to, as a local councillor that represents a ward that actually includes this quarry area, I can vouch for the fact that I have had people on the phone to me in distress over the years, in pain, affecting their mental health. This is a wide issue that has been going on for far too long, and I think we're all around the room here, the councillors on this committee are all in some way connected with this issue by virtue of being a local council as well, so you understand that as well. I'd like to also thank the Borough Council staff, particularly Nesta and her team, for the work they've done over the last few years on this, because I often go unheard and heralded, but they're doing their job, yes, but they are going well beyond that in the process of trying to get to the bottom of this and go out and all hours of the night to investigate these urges and to make the reports and get to the stage where we could take the abatement notice process, win the abatement notice, of course, and now we're obviously waiting for the Secretary of State, hopefully to give us permission to pursue that abatement notice through the courts, because this operator failed to control the areas coming out of that site, as we're all aware of. So I think we do really need to make a notice of that. And also, our previous chief executive, Martin Hamilton, who left us right up until the last day He was working with us, and he was ensuring that we had all the data together, everything ready to go on this obviously prosecution intend to take if the Secretary of State gives permission. So I think I'd like to pay tribute to those. I think as leader of the council, my role is to ensure that the council and the officers have the resources and the support to do that job. And I feel that not just me, but all the councillors in this room and the other councillors, all 44 of us over the last few years, have ensured that that is the case, to ensure that our officers can fulfil the duties of this council and pursue through the abatement notice statutory nuisance which they have done. I think for me, the failures for me have come on the Environment Agency. We've seen already the questions that you put in, Councillor Brown, relating to that extra tonnage. That was given permission by the EA on the back of the Borough Council obviously objecting, local residents objecting, the liaison committee discussed it and objected to that as well, even though there was no official vote in that. It was seen around the room by everybody there that it wasn't a good idea. And the county council, I'm sure, can dig out some documentation that proves they were in the same boat, if I remember, at the liaison committee. But of course, as said by Neil, they were just taking the approach of the Highways Authority. There's no change to the number of vehicles, kept the number of vehicles. Then we saw, of course, the refusal of the Environment Agency to bring that monitoring equipment to that site when it's clear that it was an odour that needs to be further investigated. That didn't happen too late. Again, this council, these councillors, me, the community, the liaison committee, we're all asking for that monitoring equipment to come back. And of course, when finally it did come back, one of the main monitoring equipment sites at Gallingale wasn't switched on one of the worst weekends of the stint back in 2020, 2021. And we never really got a proper explanation for that to my liking. And then, of course, we've heard since, obviously, within the last few months or so, that the calibration equipment wasn't correct by the Environment Agency. Many questions we had, why was that not checked along the way? Why did it take so long to come out? And then, of course, now we're still waiting many months now for the results of that investigation to see if those odour levels are much higher than we thought they were. What's the effect on public health will come out of that? What's the effect on the residents that live around there? So again, another dropped ball, a series of dropped balls really from this Environment Agency. And of course, even such things as some members will recall press releases were altered after they've been put out, and they showed the operator in a better light. We actually put out a press release. I remember so plainly, I was in this room. We put out a press release on the back of an Environment Agency press release about a breach, which was said to be a breach of the permit. That was then changed later to be a minor breach. But obviously, the decision had been made to change that. Under pressure, was it? I don't know. Certainly not from this council. We got out and actually said there's been a breach, needs to be investigated, and this operator needs to be held to account. So there's those things. I think really as a wish list, a want list for me, really of what should happen next. I think, as people have seen, the professionals perhaps have been on the local radio over this, is to get permission from the government for that legal action, so this council can then take forward the prosecution of abatement notice in the form it wants to. And then also, I think EA action is long overdue. We saw a brief pause and suspension in spring, only for 7 days on work to be carried out. That work was carried out, but here we are now in July, at a time when the stint shouldn't be as bad because of weather conditions. We are in increasing complaints, spikes in monitoring equipment, local Jerome data that proves that. And also, we're not really in the period when the stink is at its worst. That is in October, November, December, historically. So what's it going to be like? And the EA need to take action. And of course, we've already seen from the evidence given by the previous two speakers, they are the ones that have the permits of action. They can take, they can suspend again, they can closure, they can ask for any work to take place within that permit. So they should be hopefully doing that. And secondly, I've been on the liaison. I've been on the liaison committee for a number of years, representing the ward I represent as a county council rep. And I would say that is a body that's working as it should do. And now it's also public to see what happens on there. For many years, it was behind closed doors. It's got a lot of local residents back so quite that. And so as part of the abatement notice process, I ensured in there that would be open to the public to view after. So the meetings are put up online after the people to see. And to see what, the representatives of the community on there, whether they be parish councils or so-called residents associations, you can see how they are holding the operating account. Don't see how I do, and how other members are members sitting around this table that are on the liaison committee, and that's a really important function for us to do, and we do that quite well, and people can do that if they wish. That's my statement. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much for that. In case I forget at the end, really the same point that I made after the previous session. Can the Secretariat please make sure the Environment Agency have the link to what's gone on this morning? Because quite clearly there's a number of important issues, a number of important points, a number of important questions. And I would ask that the Secretariat makes clear to the Environment Agency that there will be a number of questions on the 14th of August that have come up during the course of today, and we will expect them to be in a position to answer those questions on the 14th of August. I'll now move to questions from members. No questions from members? Councillor Adcock, I knew you would resist. Thank you.
Sure, but thank you, Chair. So you quite rightly outlined all the huge litany of failings of largely by the Environment Agency over the last few years. Well, there's nothing we can do about now. What actions are you taking now as leader to ensure that we can get a resolution to this as quickly as we can? What actions are you taking in terms of with the Environment Agency and with government?
Thank you. But yeah, I think as I said, is that initially going to be government now and be in place. And of course, I'm not being politically at all, because people remember that on previous government, I've held the Secretary of State to account even in this chamber, because the room we use for our council meetings. I've actually said, Mr. Sunak, when you responded to my letter about a public inquiry, and we got it eventually. So it's not a case of just targeting the new government we're in, but I have, within the first few days of the new government, asked them to hurry along the process for the permission to take legal action. I've also called again for that public inquiry. I think I'm doing that not for myself, I'm doing that on behalf of the council. It's been many, many times when this council, elected members, have asked for a public inquiry. I think there has to be at the end of this. I don't care about the timing of it. I think there should be an announcement there is going to be one. I know that the VA are engaged in their legal actions against the operator. That should come first. But I think ultimately we need to have that legal action and that in public inquiry into the role and the failures of the VA over a number of years. And finally, I think just on I've been really sort of proactive over the years of ensuring that there is a political input into the strategic coordinating group. Now, both previous speakers, the officer from the borough and the county, talked about the strategic coordinating. I think Nesta put a slide up saying who's involved in that. I've ensured that there's also been a political small element to that. We've had the leader of the county council, myself, police and crime commissioner, the representatives from the health agencies, so we know them to account on how they are run, and the EA are there, of course, as well, on how the whole partnership is holding the operator to account. Because I'll come back to this, because and you know this, and everybody knows this. This operator is causing the stink. They are responsible for it, and they should be held to account for it. We've had a failing regulator for a number of years that hasn't really held them to account, and the borough council has had to step in. And as you know, over the last few years, we've made actions as councillors and as a full council that have led to us getting to where we can now take this legal action. In despite of the lack of action by the EA, we've had to step in with our own sort of regulatory local framework, which has cost money, which has cost time. But I think it's the right thing to do for our residents, and I will continue to hold the into account where I can, holding the government to account. I know we've got a new MP now. He's just getting the seat on the table. Has already raised it in Parliament, which has support, which is really good stuff. And carrying on from our previous MP, who did a lot of work, and he'll be in this seat in a bit. Aaron Ballard worked tirelessly during his time as an MP to raise this, and really got it brought to a national forum. That's what we need to do. We need to keep this, so any interviews I can do on media, anytime I can speak in council or come to these events, I do what I can do to keep this in the public eye, so we can get a resolution to. Because at the end of the day, our residents are suffering from this, night after night, and I think that's the beginning of what I said about people got on the phone to me on tears, people in distress, and particularly during the worst periods of this thing in 2021. And people were on the verge of breakdowns and stuff, and mental health and stuff like over this, and a long time it's been going on. So
Any further questions? No, it seems like you've done well, Leader, to with your presentation to answer the points and concerns. And thank you very much indeed for coming today to contribute to the inquiry. We'll now move on to Aaron Bell, the previous MP. Thank you very much for coming today. I know obviously you've now left office, but I would like to thank you very much on behalf of the community and the residents for the work that you did during your period as RMP to raise the profile of this issue and to seek resolution. So if you'd like to make your points, and then we'll have the opportunity for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Becky Smith. And with your indulgence and indulgence of the council, I would just like to put on public record what an honour and privilege it was to be the Member of Parliament for Newcastle under Lyme for 4.5 years. It's the highest professional honour of my life, and it's something I will always look back on with fondness. In particular, obviously the opportunity and the sad opportunity to have to represent people so aggressively, so persistently on the matter of Walleys Quarry. One of the terms of reference is about what opportunities have been missed, and I regret to say opportunities I think have been missed, notably by the Environment Agency. To all the residents affected, I'd like to say that I'm sorry that we couldn't get the place closed during my period in office. I very much hope that we will be able to do that in the near future. And I'd like to wish my successor, Joe G, well in everything he does as the MP, but specifically in tackling the matter of Walleys Quarry. And I'm very encouraged by the fact that it's his first question in the House that he's asking another question today. I believe the health questions on the matter. I've spoken with Adam about Walleys Quarry since his election, and I'll stand ready to help him in whatever way possible, because this is far beyond party politics. It's a matter of justice and accountability for everybody. As I think everybody in the room knows, I was the MP from December 2019 to June 2024. The issue of the landfill site overshadowed my entire period in office. In fact, even before I became MP, I was campaigning on the issue. As you heard from Councillor Tagg, we worked together, especially when it got a lot worse, over the heads of an environment agency that weren't responding, that were patronising us, were patronising the community, saying that as the odour was getting progressively worse in that sort of winter 2020 into 2021, and while we were still going through lockdowns and all those things as well, they were saying, well, it's essentially a social media campaign, and it obviously wasn't, and they were badly exposed on that in terms of monitoring and so on. I don't want to go into all the details. We've got my written statement, which has a fairly brief overview of all the actions I've taken on Walleys Quarry as the MP. I'll assume you've all got a copy of that, and happy to take any questions on all of that. The broader point I'd like to make is that the injustice, the suffering, being unfair and wrong, we've been badly let down by, particularly, obviously by the operator themselves, but from a government's perspective by the people who are supposed to do something about it, and that's the Environment Agency. And I pay tribute to everything the council have done, and we heard from Nesta, we heard from Simon, we heard from others about the abatement notice and so on, but the fact is it's the Environment Agency who are the primary regulator here. I think their approach has been poor, I think their competence has been inadequate at various times. I go back to the first, well, not the first monitoring exercise, the monitoring exercise that was published shortly after I was elected, based on data from before I was elected. That was a whitewash that wouldn't even attribute the blame for the odour where it was clearly pointed. There's a cultural weakness in the Environment Agency and willingness to tackle Walleys Quarry, and also their sensitivity. I think sensitivity, particularly the previous leadership of the Environment Agency, was not in tune with the community throughout, certainly not in tune with me, and we lost the trust of the local community through that, and it made it more difficult when mistakes were made. And for example, I did believe the monitoring station was a genuine mistake, but it makes it very, very hard for people to trust that these people have your best interest in heart when they keep making mistakes and not handling it with the sensitivity required. I think the single biggest mistake that was made, and we may have a closed site plan if they hadn't done that, was allowing the operator to suspend voluntarily back in March, April 2021, when they hit them with some CCS2 breaches. If they hit them with suspension notice then, we would have been able to have a closure notice earlier this year. I know the Environment Agency might have considered going to a closure notice earlier this year, but they didn't feel they could do that on the legal advice because they hadn't been through a suspension notice period first. They've now done that. Again, they were a bit embarrassed by how quickly Walleys Quarry complied with that suspension notice, which again shows that they've been softly for far too long with this operator. They estimated it would take 4 weeks. They had it solved within about 10 days. And Walleys tried to get it within the week, and there were legal battles around that as well. Again, it looks like an operator that isn't up to the job of understanding the world they're regulating. I've mentioned this issue of miscalibration of the sensors. Then there's issues, I think, overall with the law that need changing. It's too easy how regulators in general, specifically the Environment Agency, I know they've been under legal threat from the operator throughout, and every stage they've taken, that they've been challenged. The operators tried to sue me twice as well. And that's an issue about strategic lawsuits against public participation. There's a wider issue in the justice system in that it can be used to frustrate, delay, and essentially make people's jobs, regulators, all journalists' jobs, far harder than it needs to be in dealing with situations that need addressing. I think there are questions about planning law, about siting landfills. Some of that was taken up by DLUC, as was following my 10-minute rule bill. The bonds attached to the landfills are insufficient. The fines attached are insufficient. The pace at which everything's happened has been discussed today. I don't think is fast enough either. And finally, before I take your question, I just like to say there's such an enormous opportunity cost to this landfill. The amount of time and effort that has been spent by everybody in this room, by the council more widely, all the councils, the Environment Agency themselves, me, my office, my staff, most of all by all the people who've been affected by this, by all the people who've dedicated time in their lives to campaigning against this. I pay tribute to all of them, particularly to Dr. Mixall, who I think it's taken a personal toll on him, the amount of work he's done. I know you're going to hear from some of the campaign groups this afternoon. That's all time that could have been spent doing better things. It's time that could be spent on whatever people want to do, whether it's with their family, their jobs, or campaigning for something more important. And I know Martin Hamilton was mentioned by Councillor Dan. I know he would much have preferred to spend his time on the regeneration of the town centre and all the funding that we've had available for that. But inevitably and correctly, the council has been representing its residents, and the council this will be doing that too in tackling this blight. And it is a blight, and we're not the only one, but we are by far the worst one. And ultimately, we need to get on top of the waste industry collectively, because there are issues at all levels, from fly tipping up to regulated sites such as Walleys Quarry, in between lots of issues with waste dumping on farms. And I know that the issues in my community around that as well. I don't want to go on any further, really, but I'm very happy to take questions about all of that. And as I say, I do wish Adam Joshi all the best in continuing the fight against an operator that is clearly, that does not have the best interest of the community at heart.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron, for that, which is much appreciated. Rather than let Councillor Adcock ask the first question, I think as it's the last before lunch, should take that myself. It's very easy to use adjectives to describe failures, and it becomes emotional. But to put it simply, would you agree that there has been a comprehensive failure on behalf of the Environment Agency in terms of the actions or inactions with regards to Walleys Quarry?
I think in the round, yes, I would say it's a comprehensive failure. It should not have taken as long to get to the situation I still believe we need, which is a closed site. I think there have been more than enough breaches, evidence breaches over the last few years to have got to that situation already. There has also been a lack of evidence because they didn't collect it at various times. We were still relying on the sniff test when I was elected. So it's completely inappropriate. I don't fault them for everything they've done. They're operating under regulators' code. They have at times done things that have been helpful to the community. I've always understood, not explicitly but clearly implicitly, that their strategy has been a long-term strategy of making sure that the operator pays for as much of the remediation work as possible before, in due course, they throw the book at them. And they still haven't thrown the book at them, of course, for the regulatory failings. And every time there's been these CAR forms, these breaches, they've said you are required to do this, whether it's capping, or wells, change your management procedures, or waste acceptance procedures, and so on. And we will reserve the right to punish you at a later date. We still haven't seen that punishment. We still haven't seen that regulatory inquiry, which was, I think, first promised to me to be in the summer of 2023. And we are now a year on from that. That it wasn't promised inside, but it was indicated to me that we might be looking at summer 23 when we might see the fruits of that regulatory investigation. The criminal investigation that is also ongoing. I think it's wise that we don't speculate too much about that in this room. But again, that's been ongoing for a very long time, and there's no end in sight to that as far as I can see. In sum, I do think there is an overall comprehensive failure by the Environment Agency. And regrettably, I think it was a cultural issue, particularly with the previous leadership. I've been very encouraged actually by the new leadership, particularly Phil Duffy, the new chief executive of the Environment Agency. But when I met with James Bevan, the previous chief executive, back in April 2021, it was a Zoom call at the time for COVID-related reasons, I believe. He started by saying, well, this happens all over the place from time to time. And it was just a completely insensitive approach, given that this was by far the worst example, by far the highest levels of odor recorded anywhere in the country. For him to come onto a call and just assume that this is yet another MP whinging about his local landfill was emblematic of all the problems with the Environment Agency. And I do believe it's down to culture. And the final point I probably should have made at the beginning is that you're struck as an MP by how little control not only you but also your ministers have over bodies like the Environment Agency. We set up in the 90s mostly a number of bodies that are so-called arm's length bodies, some for perfectly reasonable sort of reasons that suggest well, it would be better if this was independently managed with an independent board, appointed by the Secretary of State or whatever. But essentially, they will operate in their own way. But it means there aren't really the levers for ministers to pull. And I've had a succession of waste ministers and secretaries of state who I spoke to and continually lobbied about Walleys Quarry. But the reality was they are not permitted to direct the Environment Agency to just close the damn place down, which is what might have happened in the 60s or 70s, because we set up this structure around it. So, and obviously, if they did do that, then there would be some judicial review, and Walleys Quarry would likely win any such judicial review. And of course, with the abatement notice that the council is pursuing, the Secretary of State has a quasi-judicial role in finally approving any prosecution of that abatement notice, and therefore they need to be very careful and reserve their position on that. Though, of course, I did lobby the various Secretary of States to grant that, and I assume Adam will be doing the same with Steve Reed, the new Secretary of State. But there is a general point about government, and this could far wider than the capacity of this council to do anything about it. But these arm's length bodies are incredibly unresponsive to democratic incentives, to the input of elected members, of elected council leaders, of elected people. That they are essentially a law unto themselves. And the only point really at which there is direction from central government is when it comes to appointing new chief executives. It's not just them, it's Natural England, it's HMRC, it's all sorts of the FSA, it's all sorts of, sorry, the FCA. There's all sorts of public sector bodies that don't have that responsiveness to democratic imperatives because of the structures we've built. And I think I'm not suggesting ministers should, words should be law. There obviously needs to be some oversight of what ministers do, but I think we've moved too far away from something that's genuinely responsive. And what we've experienced here in Newcastle and the Line is unfortunately a symptom of that.
Well, thank you very much. And I think that supplementary point that you made at the end is quite informative as the situation that exists in terms of the disconnect between so-called levers of power and things happening on the ground. Right, I'll look to members now for questions. I'll Councillor Jones first, and then Councillor Wheeler.
Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to put on record my thanks for the tireless work you have undertaken, particularly with this issue. I think it has been a real testament of your time in office, how much time you dedicated to this and how much you push. Appreciate it. One of the things that, and I'd appreciate any light you can shed on this. One of the issues that particularly concerns me when we look at regulation of this site is that we're not just talking about any old site. We're talking about what must be the worst site that's regulated, the worst landfill site regulated in this country. It's the worst site for monitoring, it's the worst site for compliance. One of the issues that I have when I discuss this with residents is that they see other sites around the country having breaches, some of which are less serious than the regular breaches we see at this site, and that site being instantly closed by the Environment Agency, or operations being instantly suspended by the Environment Agency. And it almost feels as if every other site in the country is more likely to face a suspension or closure notice or a less serious breach than this site is. And I wonder if there's any light you can shed on that as to the reason why, in your opinion, that this site seems to be forgiven.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Thank you for your kind words at the beginning there. Yes, and that's been noted by myself as well as by residents throughout. I think there are probably multiple reasons. Firstly, some of the individual sites where they are very small operators, they don't have the wherewithal to engage in the kind of legal challenge. I should say I'm assuming a certain amount of legal challenge. I don't know, obviously, the Environment Agency wouldn't share with me the details of how they've been challenged by Walleys Quarry over practically every CAR, but my understanding is that that's what's happening at every turn. My understanding is that they are determined to prosecute Walleys Quarry for all of the breaches. I can't speak to the criminal side of it, but all of the breaches that have occurred, and they are determined not to essentially screw that prosecution up by anything procedurally that might be seen as unfair or unauthorised. But I think they were far too weak throughout to get to that point, and this is why it's so important they did take the step they did earlier this year, the suspension notice, under pressure from myself, from the community, from I think about 9,000 people who signed that petition, from the council leader and from the councillors as well. The suspension notice was quite already an obviously appropriate step that should have been taken, as I say, formally back in 2021, when cleverly Walleys Quarry chose to jump before they were pushed to that point. And we all went, oh, well, that's great, it's closed for a bit. And then they opened it sooner, and the Environment Agency looked toothless yet again. So I think some of it is that it's easier for them to pick off smaller breaches where it is genuinely sometimes it's people who don't have a permit at all, or where it's absolutely manifest that they put in excess of the permit in there. Some people are willing to hold their hands up and step back. I mean, there is a fundamental problem with waste crime in this country. I had it told to me by the previous regional director that, that the whole industry is with should say former criminals, people who've been convicted of crimes related to waste. We've obviously got a collective big problem with fly tipping, which should be addressed somewhat, I think, by some of the measures we've taken towards the end of the last government about making it easier for people to recycle things without fees. But also, we've got a massive problem with farmers taking waste onto their farms under exemptions, and there being practically no monitoring of that. But then at the top end, we've got issues with, as we've seen, things like Operation Nosedive. And I work with colleagues such as David Davis and Kevin Jones around the wider issue went to the National Crime Agency about the issues of waste crime more generally. My understanding is it's all now finally being taken a bit more seriously, and the HMRC are now actively getting involved, because fundamentally this is about tax evasion, avoidance, misdescription of waste is how the Environment Agency, the problem in general terms is that there's a misdescription of waste problem. But to go back to your original question, sorry, I'm digressing a little, Councillor Jones, is I think it's related to the scale of the problem and the desire to get a proper prosecution at the end of the process. But the process has taken far too long, and there's stuff has been going on. And of course, there's been no restitution, no compensation. I wrote repeatedly to Walleys Quarry where they did make admissions, but what are you going to do about compensating people? There's never been any compensation. I know there's a civil process ongoing that people are seeking to get that for. People have lost out in so many ways. The people I feel most sorry for are the people who have pre-existing conditions, because I think those are the people who've been affected most, whether it's a physical condition or a mental health condition. But there's also people who've lost out directly in house sales, property values, all sorts of reasons. And I did conduct that health and impact report way back in May 2021, which I think, I was intending to rerun that actually this summer. It hasn't had the election sooner, but I think the issue is still standing on that.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Those councillor Wilson next.
I'm aware from having looked things up that other local authorities or authorities have actually been closed down and punishments levied. I'm going to ask quite a sort of emotive question. Is it either incompetence or reluctance on the part of the Environment Agency to have a look at Walleys Quarry more closely and act as they should? Or is it because they're just too big and they don't want to suffer the flack? I mean, I'm looking for your insight now. I'd also like to say that as far as I'm concerned and my residents, both you and Sandtag as Legion Council have been like a dynamic duo in fighting that good fight.
Thank you, Councillor William. I appreciate that. I think the core issue around whether there are definitely elements of incompetence, as we've discussed, things like the monitoring stations, the ASCA where they didn't turn them on to begin with, and then finding out that they weren't recording properly. There have been elements where the EA has made errors and held their hands up. I think more widely it's been a cultural issue. There's the historic relationship they have with Red Industries when there was a case back in the early 2010s relating to poisoning the River Trent, and the Environment Agency lost that case quite badly due to evidential failures. So I think they've always treaded very carefully around Red Industries and Walleys Quarry on the belief that they didn't want to go down that path of a misjudged prosecution again. So they'd be very careful to gather their evidence and so on subsequently. But I think going back, for example, to that monitoring report that relates to the air monitoring from January to May 2019, when that was on my desk shortly after I got elected, that's very indicative. It was they had a pattern of monitoring stations around the landfill. They were all indicating an odour coming from the direction of the landfill, and yet the report would not say the odour was coming from the landfill. It was utterly pathetic. That you had this quite clear evidence, and they weren't willing to say that, presumably under legal pressure, that they didn't feel they could justify that for whatever reason. But it was actually symptomatic of their unwillingness to actually tackle the problem at source. This led Walleys Quarry to be able to stonewall, to be able to obfuscate, to suggest it might be coal mine work and all the rest of it. We've had all sorts of delaying tactics, and if the Environment Agency grasped the nettle earlier, then I think we could have accelerated the timetable. Now, it's true that when I became the MP, it wasn't at its worst at all. There was definitely a huge uptake as we into the Christmas 2020, early 2021. Quite why that's the case has not been satisfactorily explained. That it's telling that it followed lockdown when the Environment Agency weren't doing site visits during lockdown, in my opinion, and that we saw that affected that on other sites in the borough as well. So it may be related to that. But fundamentally, there was a cultural reluctance to get to grips with the problem early because it was clearly a big problem. They obviously wanted to get it right. They still do want to get it right. As I say, I was much more encouraged by the new leadership we've seen. But for me, it's time for them to deliver on that. Obviously, a closure notice will reply further breaches to be identified. It's been bad again this last weekend. It's been bad again recently. We need to see what happens with that. In terms of the prosecution of the abatement notice, that's a matter for the Secretary of State, the Council, and Simon doing exactly the right thing and pushing for that. And finally, a point that was made earlier about possible abandonment of the site and so on. I'd secured from number 10 in the Treasury a broad hypothetical commitment that we would not be on loan for it locally if that was the case. If at some point the site is closed or even the operator runs the site to completion And then for whatever reason, the operator is unable or unwilling to continue its responsibilities in managing the site post-closure and abandons it. I was very clear that the burden of that should not fall upon Newcastle or Staffordshire taxpayers. And I went to Treasury in number 10 to secure, had to be a hypothetical at that point, that could be funded by central government. I'd urge Adam to do the same. We don't want to, I mean, that's obviously moral hazard in the sense that you're putting the whole country on the hook for the performance of an operator. There are inadequate fines and inadequate bonds, but it's something that we do have to realistically prepare for. And one of the things the MP can do is to try and lobby for funding, and that's what I'd urge Adam to do as well.
Thank you. Do you have something, Mary?
Just stuck in.
Certainly.
So it's in your written evidence and your verbal evidence that you've given, Erin, that when I asked the question, is it incompetence or reluctance, it's a fair measure of both.
Yes, I think that there has been a fair measure of both. I think they've become more competent and more willing as time's gone on, and that's because partly the scale of the problem has changed, partly because I think that the pressure has been put on them, not least by the abatement notice. I think the council, I think that's only the second time a local authority has sought an abatement notice and secured an abatement notice for something that would be the EA's responsibility. And I think it really cast them in a terrible light that it fell to a borough council, a modestly sized borough council, the same size as many others, but it fell to a borough council to actually take on this problem that is clearly the EA's responsibility and should have been dealt with earlier. And I think there's a cultural unwillingness to get to grips with the problem early enough. I think they are getting to grips with it now. But as I say, I'm sorry that it's taken so long to get this, and I think there were missed opportunities along the way.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll add my thanks on behalf of the residents of Silverdale for all you did during your term. I know how much residents there did appreciate it. My question is, do you think that the public health implications here have been taken seriously enough by agencies such as the Environment Agency and in government? And what do you think is going to have to change in future in regulating sites like these, where there is a significant public health concern that kind of steps in earlier and overrides concern? Because as you know, it's gone on for so many years where this could long-term impact for people's health. We don't know for sure yet. But what's going to have to change in future to make sure that public health crises like this are addressed earlier by government and by agencies?
Thank you, Councillor Adcock, and thank you for your words as well. And I've always had in mind that the people of Silverdale and Brookfield are the people who are closest to be most affected, but it's something that's affected the whole constituency at various times, depending on the levels of odour. I think the public health point is really, really important. I do think that it was taken seriously by Public Health England and later the Health and Security Agency that succeeded them. In the meetings I had with them, I think they had frustration with the Environment Agency. I think there was wide frustration with the Environment Agency actually from many other public bodies. The Environment Agency wanted to call these meetings, big meetings, to sort of spread responsibility out, but always wanted the information and the levers to actually being able to do anything about it. It felt many times in those meetings, which I wasn't in, but my understanding is that it was always about, well, that's the council's responsibility, that's the health responsibility. We can't take questions on that. And yet they were the only people who could actually do anything about it. I think the Dr. Richard Harling at Staffordshire County Council was very strong on the risk to public health of the landfill. We still haven't got the corrected data. To some extent, the figures about long-term, medium-term, short-term levels of annoyance, nuisance, and health impact are somewhat arbitrary lines that have been drawn up by either nationally or by the WHO at varying points. But factors, those thresholds have been exceeded. They may have been exceeded by more than we realised at the time due to failures and monitoring. When we get that data, I think it's very important we do get a public health angle on what those numbers mean. I'm grateful to the council for county council for setting up counselling and advice on these matters. Very grateful to all the GPs, but particularly Dr. Scott in Silverdale Village Surgery, for doing the work in seeing the health impact it's having on people. That really it was obvious from my own survey that it was having an impact on people's health. Simple things like headaches, nausea, nosebleeds, and then people with depression, stress, anxiety, And then the more complicated things, obviously the case of Matthew Richards, which went to the courts and so on. I think when we get that corrected data, I think we need a revised health statement. And at some point when we talk about compensation, the health impact needs to be taken into account, but fundamentally people don't want compensation to be taken on clean air. And the route to clean air, in my opinion, is to get the place shut down as soon as possible, and that's what still needs to be everybody's priority.
Thank you. Do you have something? No, any further questions? No, well, good. Thank you very much indeed for that. And I think you've given us some very useful information, particularly, as I said earlier, about how the disconnect between the ministerial levers and these non-departmental distant bodies operating on the ground. I think we've had a very useful morning. We've covered a lot of issues in depth, and we've got quite a lot of useful information. And we've only gone about 6 or 7 minutes over the projected time, which, given what we covered and the comprehensive response we've had from you, Aaron, and indeed from the other speakers, it's quite surprising that we've managed to keep so little time. So thank you very much indeed. That concludes the morning session. There will be the second session will start promptly at 2 o'clock when we will be hearing from Stop the Skin and the community organisations such as Silverdale Parish Council. So thank you very much. We now adjourn until 2 p.m.
Sign this.
Good.